Yo, 2013 Honda Pilot. The victim's complaining about a shake in the steering wheel when he's hitting the brakes. So normally that's a front rotor. I'm looking at the right front here. And it's over 2 thousandths. It's just right at the limit. So he needs a rotor, or he needs to get one resurfaced. And the brake pad's right down to 4mm. So I can't see putting a rotor on this thing with a pad like that. There's one rear pad that's down to 2mm. So that's due to be replaced. He's also got one really juicy rear shock. Well, that ain't no good. All these rotors seem to turn really nice by hand without dragging, so the calipers are probably okay. His brake fluid looks about no good. I told the fella to order some parts for this. He went to the fancy magnet sticker place. Got ceramic pads, 4 rotors. And these shocks. I guess I'm gonna do another amazing brake job video with a brake flush and shocks. First thing I'm gonna wanna do is get as much brake fluid out of these calipers as I possibly can. It's all old crappy fluid, so I don't want it to run back up in the line and back up the master cylinder. So I got a 10mm here. I'm gonna try to loosen this bleeder screw without breaking it. Thankfully it loosened up. And I just want to loosen it just enough to get everything to dribble out of there. And then I'm going to try to get in here with a pry bar and just pull on this caliper. Now these slides are a little sticky. Get behind this piston here. Pull that in as far as it'll go. Nice and easy. There's a rubber boot there. You want to make sure you don't wreck that thing. Don't tear that or anything. I'm just going to close this line off. Doesn't need to be real tight. I'm just going to snug it down so it doesn't leak for now. I'm going to do the same on the fronts. These are a little trickier because there's no big gaping hole here for a big fat pry bar. I'm just getting right in between the inboard pad and the rotor. And this caliper's a little sticky too. Doesn't want to move. So I got to do some slide repairs on these, I'm sure. I'll do the same to the other two. Now I'm going to suck out as much of this brake fluid as I can. I probably won't be able to get too much out. You can use a turkey baster if you want, or just open up the bleeders and let them dribble out. You don't want to empty this out all the way though with the bleeders open. There, I got as much out of there as I can get. I have a 32-ounce bottle of DOT 3 brake fluid. I'm just going to stick it in here and it looks like it'll stay in there, kind of. I just want to make sure that the bottom of the bottle is in the reservoir. And it seems like it's going to work. So I'm going to try to do this without making a mess. And science says I can put this in here like that. Looks like I'll be good. I don't think it's going to leak out. I'm going to do the front brakes first. So while I do the fronts, I'm going to bleed out the rears. So I'm just going to crack this line open. I got a hose I'm going to put on it so it can dribble in this bucket. I'm just going to keep an eye on that and let it drip until it's nice and clear and clean fluid on both sides. I have two 17mm for this caliper. I don't want it hanging on the brake line either, so I got a bungee cord here I'm going to put on this thing somehow. That's pretty good. And I have two 19 millimeters for this caliper support bracket. Two number 3 Phillips screws holding this rotor on. I got an impact screwdriver. You just kind of turn it to the left and hammer on it at the same time. If they break or you can't get them off, you got to drill the heads out and then the rotor will fall right off. If this rotor don't come off, you just got to give it a good whack to loosen it up. And if it's still stuck on there, whack it harder. Now I want to make sure that the mating surface is nice and clean and free of rust. You can sand it. A lot of people use a disc sander of some kind. I just use a scraper, carbide scraper. If you have a big chunk of rust on your hub, it'll feel like you got a warped rotor. You'll get a pedal pulsation. If you don't have sandpaper or a carbide scraper and you have a file, you can just use that. It usually works pretty good too, because files are nice and hard and they got a nice square edge on them. Now I have these slide pins to contend with. This one's kind of stuck, not too bad. It's a little rusted up. I can dump some brake cleaner in here. I got a nylon brush. If these are totally stuck and they don't move at all, you can either get a torch on them, or it's probably a good idea just to get a new caliper. I'm going to salvage what I got. Make sure these boots aren't ripped or anything. Cleaned up these pins on a wire wheel nice enough. I got some Sil-Glide here. You can use silicone paste too for this. Don't use that stuff that's in your brake pad box. That's not made for caliper slides. I want to put a little lube right here to make sure there's just a little bit of grease on the seal. Make sure these turn really good. Want to push them in and bleed the air out of it. Give it a little burp. Now I can take these abutment clips off. I got a rough file here. I'm just going to hit this stuff real good and knock all the big chunks of rust off everything. Get those down to bare metal again. I got new abutment clips here. It's fun. This cute little diagram says lube everything. It's gray. It's not black like most stuff you see in a brake pad box. Maybe you can lube everything with this stuff. I'm not going to. There's a wear indicator on the pad, this metal tab. You want to make sure it's the same as the one you took off. I just set them in here to make sure all this slides really nice. You don't need any lubricant on the abutment plates. Those are always dry from the factory, and just so long as all this stuff slides really nice, it's going to work really good. Now I got a whole bunch of rust and junk on these calipers, and that makes high spots on the caliper pistons and on this side of the caliper. You want to knock all them high spots down, because if them high spots of rust are in there, you're going to get a horrible pedal feel. You want a really nice feeling brake pedal. You want to get all of that rust off. You just got to watch these boots too. You don't want to be hitting these boots with the file or you'll wreck them. So I'm just going to run a file on here until they're nice and clean. It's nice and shiny all the way around. That's all you need to do. That looks really good. Now I can take that stuff that's in this packet and I can put it on the caliper piston. That'll just help your pads from squeaking for a little bit. If they move around a little when you hit the brakes, until the pads break in really nice. Just slather it on both sides. You don't need a lot. This fluid looks nice and clear and clean now. I checked the bottle, I still got quite a bit in there. So I can pull this line off and close these off. The torque on these bleeders are listed as securely, so you just want to give them a little tweak when you zero them out. If you really want to, you can use a torque wrench and do about 5 foot-pounds, which is about 60 inch-pounds. That should be good enough. You always want to check them too after you're done with your brake job and hit your brakes really hard and make sure none of these are leaking. There's a little bit of oil or cosmoline on here. Want to put some brake cleaner on that. Rub it off a little bit. Gotta be careful too not to touch these edges. Sometimes they'll sharpen or cut you. And after you get that oil off of there and it's nice and dry, you want to wipe all the fuzz off of it, because there'll be some fuzz stuck to it from your rag. You want to wipe it all off and make sure it's clean, because that fuzz will make noise. Fuzz makes noise. If you don't get all the cosmoline off too, you'll feel little beads rolling up and sticking to the rotor, and then you know it's not clean enough. Okay, that's ready to go on. Give them a little tap just to make sure the rotor's seated really nice. I can just hold on to these pads and try to start these bolts. These bolts get torqued to 100 foot-pounds. They didn't give me any new springs with this brake kit. I had some laying around, so I don't have to use the old ones. These just help pull the pads out so they're not touching the rotor. I just got to hold on to the pad and put it on. Well, there's little flats on these pins. You got to make sure them are set right so they don't spin. These are supposed to get torqued to 52 foot-pounds. Now I just need to make sure this caliper slides really nice. And it does. And I can see the brake pads are moving. So the springs in here are working, and they're not binding up on the abutment clips. And that there's a perfect brake job. I just need to do the same to the other side. Kind of checking my bottle here. I don't know, it's probably about that full, so it's almost empty. I really got to keep an eye on it. You don't want to run these dry. Do the same for the bleeding on the front as the rear. The fronts usually leak out super fast too, so you really got to keep an eye on it. And that's nice and clean. I'll close these bleeders off. I'm going to do the same to both sides at the same time. I have two 12 millimeters on the caliper. I don't think I'll need a bungee cord for this. I'm just going to flop it out of the way. A lot of rust in here. I'm going to need these springs because I don't have extras. I have two 17 millimeters for the caliper support brackets. There's little washers in here too on the inside. I'm going to be reusing those. More often than not, you'll find out that those aren't in there anymore. This cleaned out with a quickness. I'm going to tighten these bleeders down. Do the 5 foot-pounds or whatever. I like doing them by hand. Now that I got the brake flush done, I can gingerly take this bottle out nice and quick. Try not to make a mess. If you get any brake fluid all over the place, you can just wash it off with water. It's hygroscopic, so it washes off with water really good. You don't want to get any brake fluid on your paint because it will eat your paint. I clean this filter. I can put that in there. Put the cap on, and after I load the calipers, I can check the fluid, and it should be, the fluid level should be right. If you top it all the way off and you unload all your calipers, and then you load your calipers back up by pumping the brake pedal when the brake job's done, That level's usually perfect. You have emergency brake shoes under these rotors. If it don't want to come off, it's because you got a big rust ring on the outside edge of the drum inside of here. And that's what this plug's for. If you take this plug off, you'll find an adjuster you can screw down. Thankfully, all that stuff looks decent. I have a little rubber plug here I need to exchange out. And I'll put this on the other rotor. Got my rotor nice and clean. I'm going to put just a touch of grease on these washers. Hopefully it'll help hold them in here so they don't fall out on me when I try to put this all back together. Yeah, fell out. These bolts get torqued to 65 foot-pounds. I cleaned up and lubed this caliper the best I could. Looked pretty good. I couldn't find any new springs for this, and they didn't have any in the hardware kit for the pads, so I got to use the old ones. Turn these pins to get them to slide in the grooves. These bolts get tightened to 27 foot-pounds. Just like the front, I want to make sure these slide really nice. Now brake pads move really good. Do the same to the other side. Now on with the rear shocks. I'm going to load this suspension just a little bit. I got two 14 millimeters on the top. Oh yeah, that shock is absolutely no good. I have a 17 millimeter bolt for the bottom. Of course, that's really stuck. Let's see if I can break a snap-on ratchet. Oh, I just broke the float. This thing's got a welded nut on the other side. I'm gonna have to do some major surgery here. I got 3 little tack welds on here. I'm gonna grind all that flat. Maybe I can pop this side out. There it goes. It's kind of angled a little bit, that bar on the top. So I'm going to face it so it's tipped in on the top. Luckily, I got a lot of Honda love around here. I found a Honda bolt, a Honda nut from something I worked on. 35 foot-pounds on the top bolts. I got 47 foot-pounds for this lower bolt. And that's it. Do the same to the other side. The wheels. 94 foot-pounds. Now after I get all 4 tires on, I just need to pump the brakes until the brake pedal comes up. Check my fluid. Drive it down the road. You want a light brake at 3 times from 30 miles an hour down to 0. And then you can do 50 and hit the brakes a couple of times and they should be bedded in just fine. If they don't make any noise after that, you're good to go. Okay, bye.